somebody asked if we could play more Motown. And I've confirmed with our music director that yes is the answer to that question. So stay tuned, maybe over the summer, maybe in the fall, we will bring more Motown. Any particular label that person wants to hear? The other question is, where do we get name badges? And we get name badges from the greeters. So I can answer those questions. Thank you for getting me started on the right foot. And the way that your oftentimes, we've done it twice, and both times your questions have broken down into groupings. I meant to time myself. Oh well. And this year they did again. They broke down into 4 groups. Isn't that convenient? Institution was one group of questions. Education, religious education, was another group of questions. Personal questions about my own path, and then spiritual questions. So that's how we'll proceed. The first set of questions we'll do the institutional questions. And so this has to do with, we'll get started anyway, by asking the question, what is the difference between a pastoral church and a program church? What are we, and what do we want to be? And this is a very important question right now. Most of you know, but some of you are guests here today. We are in somewhat of a transition. We have elected to move from this location to another location. I'm only in my 3rd year here, so this church is in a transitional phase. And a pastoral and program are basically church sizes, which then have associated with them certain behaviors and methods and operations. So there's family size, and that's where it's a small church, usually under 100 people. The decision making tends to be consensus, everyone gets a say. And then the next size up is a pastoral size church, and that's around about the number where we are, and being disagreed with. This is such a Unitarian Universalist, yes. First side is family-sized. Yes, we're in pastoral-sized church, basically. And that's around 150 people as a sort of middle number. And in those churches, a lot of focus is on the pastor. And the decision-making tends to be a little less consensus. The pastor is involved in a lot of the committees, and the board has a little bit more authority in that size. Then the next size up is a program-sized church, and that size, and this is a cruel irony of my profession, that they get paid the big bucks. Program-sized ministers get the big bucks, and they do less work. So I'm very interested in growing this church into a program-sized church. More money, less work, sounds good. There it's more of this. It's more systems oriented, more policy governance. The board is just making decisions on policy. The programs kind of run themselves. So it's a bit. Every step up is a little bit higher level of institutionalization. Now, what are we? That doesn't matter so much as what we think we are, or how we behave, right? Because we behave, and I think we are, on any given day, all 3 of those sizes. We were a family-sized church, and we still have some vestiges of that kind of behavior and thinking, and it actually can be difficult as we try to continue to grow. And so there is still a feeling that we, especially amongst those who've been here for a really long time, they've lived through this change. And of course, change is difficult, right? And so sometimes it's difficult to take your hands off the wheel a little bit. So that's one of the things that a family-sized church, growing into a pastoral-sized church, that's one of the difficult transitions that they have to make. And we are doing it at times very gracefully, and at times less gracefully. but we're doing it. And then sometimes we behave as a program-sized church because we are a very active community. We tend to, in September, and this is probably my fault, over-program ourselves and then have a little bit of burnout factor around February. So what do we want to be? This church in this area has, I believe, the capacity, not in this facility, but in another facility, have the capacity to be a program church if that's what we want to be. Now the fear there is that you won't recognize everybody, you won't see your friends, and you will see your friends. I grew up, so to speak, in a 600-person church in Austin. 400 friends, 600 members, and friends. So 2 observations from that. We had a group of people who would stay the longest after service every Sunday. I was the coffee guy, so I was the last person out the door. They would sit around in a circle and complain about how they didn't have community. 15 of them every Sunday, the same 15. I was like, this is actually what community looks like. And the other thing is you develop within that larger structure. So I'm speaking to the fear about growth right now. Within that structure, there's many opportunities, A, to meet new people, and B, to form very, very close relationships. So close that you might get married, as I did when I met my wife at a 600-member church, as 2 of our friends also did. So that may scare you also. But there's plenty of opportunity for very close relationships in even a large congregation. Very, very dear relationships. So the follow-on question to this is, change can be difficult. So is that true? And the answer to that is yes and no. But what would the following people say about change and living with change? And I was given 3 people: Darwin, Jung, and Rumi. So a little bit of a quiz if I know who these people are. I know Darwin. Darwin, right? Change is everything. That is how we get here. That is how we get skills. And that is how we ultimately survive and prosper. Is through change. Rumi. Rumi is very haunting and a little psychedelic. And the thing about what went through my mind when I first read Rumi in relation to this question was there's a line at the end of, or throughout one of his poems that says, "Don't go back to sleep." Is that right, Bob? Don't go back to sleep. And so you've just woken up. And this is like my life right now, because I wake up too early every day, 5 o'clock or 5:30. Before my kids are even awake, I'm awake. It's stupid. And every day, and I hold you responsible, Bob. Bob runs our spiritual poetry group, and so I had the pleasure of meeting Rumi through that group. And I read that poem, "Don't Go Back to Sleep," meaning stay with what you've just emerged into. There's no turning back into that old state. Frankly, I don't know what Jung would say. So I will be happy to live. I don't know Jung that well. I know we have Jung experts in the room, so I will encourage you to contact, with this question, Kathy afterwards, who will know what to say about Jung over coffee. All right, the next question is about education, generally speaking. One of these questions has to do with, and this emerged in a couple of different modes recently. The one that comes to mind is during our mission and vision process, one of the things that was seen as desirable was to increase our diversity. And by that, I think, was primarily meant our ethnic diversity. So this becomes a bit of a touchy subject now. And there are various reactions to that, even when it was put on the board. You know, people were like, whoa, you know, that feels like a yes and a little bit politically incorrect or perhaps inappropriate in some way. And yet we still want to see, we want diversity. Why do we want diversity is the question there. And I think because diversity encourages creativity, diversity gets us out of our own assumptions, and we are able to transform ourselves through that. So the follow-on question is, okay, so what steps can we take to increase our diversity? And in fact, last weekend at the congregational meeting, somebody suggested that as we decide where we go, that one of the questions should be how to increase our diversity. So that, considering that would be one step, but I think there's a step that we need to take prior to that as a congregation. And this is something that I'm just coming into myself, so I'll ask your grace on this. We need to educate ourselves on who we are and where we come from. Couple of weeks ago, several of us went to the Black Lives Matters Solidarity, I forgot exactly what it was called.
Call to action, I think.
Call to action. What was the group called? Do you remember?
Tucson Solidarity.
Tucson Solidarity. So it was a white allies group affiliated with Black Lives Matter. My hope for that was that we would talk a lot about white privilege and learn about systemic racism and historical racism and how we are all products of that, and how that has shaped all of us, and thereby learn to start deconstructing that, and through that become more, as a group, more diverse. That actually didn't happen at that meeting, but I think that the leadership of that group might be willing to adjust their program for us, and they might come up to our place next fall and help us walk through what historical systemic racism is about, where it has positioned us, how it has shaped us, and so that's the work that we need to do. And the question, in fact, the following question was, given the importance of religious education for all ages at MVUU, what are the roles of knowledge and learning in our vision of future transformations of ourselves and the world? So this is a timely topic, racism in America, right? I mean, I don't know when it wouldn't be a timely topic, but it is certainly a tragic topic at the moment. And it is also a difficult topic because we really do have a lot of work to do. And it's not going to change just by us wanting it to. And we are part of the thing that needs to change. So that is a transformation that can happen in part through education, and it is very profound, very, very profound. Some of the, you all know this, the most challenging personal places of transformation, the places where we are in denial, and coming out of denial is awful. It's like, no, I was gonna say it's like giving birth to yourself, but that is what it's like, but I've never given birth, so I don't really know what that's like. I imagine it to be quite painful, right? Yeah, okay, I'm on the right track? Yeah. I've been born, I know what that's like. Actually, I don't. Anyway, so taking the blinders off is a difficult process. But when you take the blinders off, when you emerge from denial, when you recognize yourself, you have been transformed. And that is an intense process. And I hope that we engage that process next year, because it is an absolutely, fundamentally spiritual pursuit. And to meditate on that, we will sing hymn number
131.
Okay. This is sort of questions about my own journey, which perhaps is reflected in your journey. And the questions are, what books inspired you the most as a developing teen? And what change in your life led you to become a UU minister? So how interesting. Think about those for yourselves as well. What books inspired you all the most as a developing teen? And what changes in your life led you into the role that you currently occupy? The books that inspired me as a developing teen, 2.5 of them prominently. One was a gift from my sister, I think. It may have been from my brother. And it was Damien by Herman Hesse, which was a book about, it was a coming-of-age story. And it was theological, and it introduced the concept of a god called Abraxas, who was both shadow and light. And basically, this youth was growing into an adult, into a world where shadow and light were both there and both inside of him. And that's mostly what I remember. Abraxas as the god of shadow and light. I don't remember the story. It was Abraxas, right? Right. And there was sex in the book too, so that probably kept me reading, I suppose. Abraxas. Oh, there we go. And so that book actually really did. It was a heavy and deep book. And after that, I read a lot of Herman Hesse. I read Siddhartha, and I tried to read The Glass Bead Game, but that was boring. I read Journey to the East. I didn't understand anything about it, but I read the whole thing. It was small, so, and maybe that speaks to my ministry. And the other book was first I read. This is back in the day when you would get catalogs of books. People would send you catalogs, and I got on some list. I don't know how. But my siblings also subscribed me to Harper's Magazine. And that's where I read that Jesus smoked marijuana. And that was probably what got me on this list. Not the FBI one, but the marketing one. And through there I saw the Tao of Pooh, and I ordered the Tao of Pooh. And I loved the Tao of Pooh for many, many years. That was a formative book. And then I started reading, so the 0.5 of that is the actual Tao Te Ching. And those were at the time when I was also sort of finding my way out of Methodism. I had a car and a girlfriend and these books, and those were the new Trinity. And from that, I became a Unitarian. Many years later, I became a Unitarian, which leads us to the next question. What change in my life led me to become a UU minister? And my first response is, I don't know. And my second response is, this is really an interesting question, because a lot of people come to church when they are in the midst of change, of some kind of transition. They'll come to church for the first time when they're in the midst of change. And that is a very interesting question for the minister to ask. Now, sometimes that change is, we just moved here. Sometimes that change is, I got a divorce. Or My spouse died. There are all kinds of change. I got a promotion. I lost a job. All kinds of changes. But a lot of times it is a change that prompts somebody to come to church. And the intuition of this question is the same intuition. What change led me to the UU ministry? I don't know what change it was. I knew what I wanted, and that was a container and a context to work out some questions, and to find people to work them out with. I know the moment that I knew that I was in the right place was it was at 22nd Street Church, and the reading for that day was Henry Miller. Now, I don't know how many of you have read Henry Miller. I love Henry Miller. At the time, I really loved Henry Miller. He was sort of a mentor and a muse to me at the time. But he's also, if you don't know who Henry Miller is, his books were banned for many years because they were explicitly sexual and explicitly everything. But they were very explicit. And I loved it because Henry Miller for me is like the lotus flower with his roots very deep in the muck. But from that emerges this beautiful flower. So anyway, they read Henry Miller. I was like, you're treating Henry Miller as a sacred text. And you're right. And so I'm in. Now, that doesn't speak to the change. It was a long time coming. I feel like I was always, the change was I found out about it. I think the change is I found out about it. I didn't know about it, and then I did. There's a lot of hymns in our hymnal that we have stolen from our own heritage and changed to meet our theology. And I think that's obviously one of them. Okay, so we're talking about the Spirit now. And one of these questions is living with heart or living from the heart. And this is somebody who is keen to the power of prepositions, which we discovered during our Mission and Vision wordsmithing. We had some hour-long conversations about whether it was in, through, or with. And here the question is, the difference is with or from. So it's in partnership with the heart, or as the heart as an origin. And I guess it would be both, right? Because living with the heart, I think that is in the world, is appropriate. Discovering, the heart here is obviously a metaphor, right? So the heart doesn't have to just be inside you. You can discover the heart in the world. And that heart is one that I think that you live with, that you are in partnership, co-creation with. The heart that is inside you is your own origin, the origin of your compassion. So I don't think that we need to choose between living from or living with the heart, but in fact, develop our own capacity to identify our compassion and exercise our compassion, and then move into the world that also has that capacity. And importantly, attune yourself to it. Live with that in your mind. I found one of my best spiritual practices that I do not do anymore. Why? I don't know. Was I would get my sermon topic for that week, and then this is when I was doing my internship in Ogden. I would go to the end of our block and walk up the mountains. And as I was walking, I would literally see all kinds of little metaphors that were speaking to that sermon topic. That's not because suddenly the world rearranged itself to talk about my sermon, but my intention was I had a focus and an open-ended focus in a way. So I just went into the world with this idea, and the world spoke to me through it. And sometimes it would say things that I didn't know, or I didn't know I knew, or it would speak in maybe opposition to it, so a counterpoint, and that would further my meditation. So that's kind of a living with and from the heart. And that, I would say, is, okay, so the next question is, for those who lead an intellectual life, what is the benefit of having spirituality in our lives? And I mean, to me, that illustration at least touches on that. And spirituality also it's something more. It's a sensation. I don't know that there's actually much of a distinction between the intellectual life and the spiritual life. They're different words for very similar things. That half of the people that identify with the intellect don't like to use the spirit words, right? But the sensation of it, so for me, spirituality is about identity. And if you increase your identity, that is a spiritual experience. We talked a lot a couple of years ago about the matrix of your identity. So to have a spiritual experience is to increase your matrix of identity. Not what you own, but where your perspective reaches. And that feeling of expansion can happen on a purely intellectual level when you learn a new thing. I would say that's a spiritual experience. So for me, the distinction is not severe, but in fact quite similar, and just in some ways a matter of vocabulary and intention. The advantage of having the spiritual intention is that I think it probably feels really good when you have that intention, in a way that the intellectual experience doesn't necessarily open itself up to that sensation of love. Because I think that's another thing, I don't know, when you have a learning experience, it is also a sensation perhaps close to love. That just occurred to me. I don't know if that's right or not. But as I think about it, learning a new thing is this revelation that flushes you with good stuff in the same way that love does. I mean, you're probably getting flushed with endorphins when you learn a new thing. When you fully accept the learning of the new thing, because learning a new thing can be hard. But accepting the learning, coming through it, that could feel like love. So I think the benefit of having a spiritual life is to really reap the full effect of the expansion of identity that is learning or new experiences, transcending your old self and becoming a slightly larger self, more expansive.